Could hundreds of construction workers have been spied on by the police? The Metropolitan Police has admitted that their elite special branch unit provided information to a secret blacklist of construction workers. This programme has now discovered that the Met know who and how many workers were targeted by the police in this way, but won't tell the workers themselves. The list was used by 44 of the UK's biggest building companies to vet workers they saw as troublemakers. Those firms have already paid out more than £75 million in compensation and legal costs to more than 800 staff who were on that list. We've learned that the police know which of these workers were targeted by Special Branch, but are refusing to release a confidential report with all the details in. Simon Cox has this.
For decades, the building industry hid a dark secret.
I'm trying to get work and I'm doubting myself, and I'm getting up every morning if I'm not working, and I'm wondering where the next job's coming from. And for long periods in my life, you're in a very dark place.
A blacklist of workers used by Britain's biggest construction firms, and those placed on it couldn't get work on any major building sites.
We didn't know how long it was going to last, but we know it's inevitable. We know the hardship we're suffering is going to worsen.
The police recently admitted they supplied information to the blacklist from undercover officers spying on workers. They're refusing to release a confidential report into this, but we've learned the police discovered which workers were targeted and have known this for more than 2 years, but still haven't told them.
I think the Met is worried because it is many hundreds of people, I think, may be affected by this.
I had a duty to my family, to myself, to try and get food on the table. You're always looking to get on sites and jobs, but when obviously it's not happening, that's when it really hurts as much as anything.
Roy Bentham was a successful carpenter when suddenly he was shut out of the building industry, unable to get a job on any major site for almost 2 decades.
You'd literally be giving your CVs into the gate and you just wouldn't be hearing anything back at all. So it was just a wall of silence whenever, you were phoning up and asking why you weren't being taken on, and people were telling there was no vacancies.
How bad did it get?
Money-wise, terrible. Obviously there's things that you think you take for granted that you would buy when you're in work, and then all of a sudden, you have to pull your own in. But on your conscience as well, it's something that you think to yourself, well, you're looking at yourself as a person, you doubt yourself as a person as well. So I've had some dark times.
What impact did it have on your relationship, on your family? I'm
not working, so there's a whole number of things which places a strain on that, and it does, and subsequently he split up.
Roy had been placed on a secret blacklist of workers, normally union activists who'd raised genuine safety concerns. It was run from this tiny office in the West Midlands by an agency called the Consulting Association and funded by 40 of the UK's biggest building firms. It was used to root out workers, and once on the list, you couldn't get work on any big project. Workers long suspected a list, but this was confirmed when in 2009 the Information Commissioner's Office raided the premises and found files for over 3,000 workers. Roy's file wasn't long. He'd only been on strike once in 1995 when he was a shop steward, but the comments about him were highly damaging. He was branded as incompetent, that he could be easily led by others as a bit of a sheep. And even worse, that he was signing on for benefits as unemployed when he was employed, which wasn't true.
I was sort of shocked. I picked it up and I thought, what the hell is this? But then I sort of joined the pieces of the jigsaw together and thought, well, this is why, being kept off building sites for a 16-year period, from when
those 16 years locked out of building sites was for going on strike just once. It had a profound effect on his life.
It ruined it. It did ruin it, because obviously I'm trying to get work, and I'm doubting myself, and I'm getting up every morning if I'm not working, and I'm wondering where the next job's coming from. And for long periods in my life, you're in a very dark place.
Once the blacklist was made public, workers who thought they were on a secret vetting list could request their files from the Information Commissioner's office. And when they got them, they suspected other forces were at work. Steve Aitchison was an electrician on major projects around the world, but that stopped when he was placed on the construction company blacklist in the year 2000, after he'd been unfairly sacked for raising health and safety concerns.
It's an absolutely terrible period, and it's not a short period. What makes it worse, it doesn't look like the end of the tunnel for me. I couldn't make promises to her. It's how it was going to be. And we didn't know how long it was going to last, but we know it's inevitable. We know the hardship we're suffering is going to worsen, it's not going to alleviate itself. The answer to that is employment. It's a real bad period, you can't buy it back, I knew something sinister was going on because I was really struggling. It was biting. It's inevitable, when you're not working, his hardship's going to start. And I had a 6-year period like that.
In those 6 years, he had no work at all. When he did manage to get a job, he'd be thrown off the project within weeks.
The mortgage is running down, and I was right on the brink. There's another thing you had to go home and tell the wife, that the ultimate, the roof over our heads was going to go.
When you had to tell your wife that, what was it like?
Well, the worst thing I've ever had to do in my life, ever, was he's just your housewife, and a mother who suffered the same as me, who's working and suffering, and then to think the very thing we worked for, it's right on the brink of being lost.
How damaging was it for you?
You're in a cesspit, basically, and there was no light to get out of it, nothing.
The only light came when he got hold of his blacklist file. He'd been called ex-IRA and a bad egg, supposedly a code used by the security services and the police's intelligence gathering undercover unit, Special Branch.
You become aware then that the state's involved itself, that's supposed to uphold the law, by the way, and they're helping these bosses inflict untold damage on thousands of decent people, and yet they've got the state helping them to keep us out of work, passing information on that's completely false, by the way. Ex-IRA, the bad egg bit, if that's their code, that's their code. What are they doing watching a normal guy like myself go to work?
As other blacklisted workers obtained their files, they suspected the police had passed on information about them too. But they didn't have any proof until they found an insider to help them. Peter Francis spent 4 years as an undercover officer with the Metropolitan Police's Special Branch, spying on left-wing activists.
I was living the lives with them. As a member, I was also a member of militants. I would go on all their demonstrations, I would go to their meetings, I would socialise with the people. We'd done everything.
After leaving the force, he became a whistleblower, revealing how undercover officers spied on campaign groups and that building workers he'd been spying on had information fed to the blacklist by Special Branch.
I was shown some extracts of files for a couple of people, and when I read the files through, this was the consulting agency files that they held on them, I just saw there's some very, very similar things to what were on the same files held by the Special Branch of these same people.
He always believed the information that he was gathering would be kept within the force.
Very worrying. The only reason that we collect the information, as far as I was aware, was that the government was aware that these people were deemed to be subversive, but certainly as far as I was aware, I was never thought that my intelligence would go down to a private system.
We know there are a few workers who think that the police supplied information to the blacklist, but do you think that there are more involved?
I'd be very surprised if it's not far more people. The Special Branch, when I left the Special Branch, which is in 2001, we had hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands upon thousands of files on individuals. So what is the chance of a lot more of them not being blacklisted, say on the consulting agency, or even maybe other indices that we're not aware of? No, I'd be stunned if all we actually had is these few activists.
So how many workers were caught up in this?
The police began investigating this back in 2014. They interviewed over 100 officers, and the findings of the inquiry were so sensitive that they were sent directly to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, where they sat for years until finally, in March 2018, the police admitted that Special Branch had supplied information to the blacklist. But crucially, they didn't say how many people were affected.
I think it's implausible to think that it comes from anywhere else other than the police. And when people first told me that, I thought that they were just talking nonsense. Things like that don't happen in this country.
Dave Smith was an engineer who, like many others, was blacklisted after he became active in his union. He was one of a group of activists who was spied on by undercover officers who spent years working and living among them.
There's always been undercover police officers, but these people have been given a new passport, they've been given a new national insurance number, and they are literally embedded with, perfectly normal campaigners, perfectly legal, democratic organisations like trade unions, just to spy on them and find out what we're doing. I've had people embedded with our group for more than 10 years, and I'm a trade unionist. I'm not a terrorist.
Being targeted by the police and blacklisted by big building companies had a massive impact on his life and destroyed his career.
It's tough, when you're defaulting on your mortgage and you're a grown man, and it's a blunt instrument, but blacklisting works. Because if their purpose was to keep me off a building site, then it genuinely did work. Because if you can't pay the bills and you can't put food on the kids' table, then you've basically just got to go and find somebody else to get a job.
But how many other builders were shut out of big sites because of information supplied by the police? We've learned that the Metropolitan Police know which workers had information on their blacklist files that had come from Special Branch, and they've known it for years. But those workers who were affected still don't know that they were targeted.
And their unions have been trying to get answers.
To find out that there was actually state involvement in that secret blacklisting, that police officers were responsible for passing information about individuals covertly to a secret organisation in order to deny them and their families money and the right to work is almost beyond belief.
The union has demanded the Metropolitan Police release their report into Special Branch links to the blacklist. So far, they've refused.
It's bizarre to GMB, and I think to certainly the people blacklisted, to understand why that happened in the first place, but also to not be able to have that information now, to give them the final part of the closure that they need.
The building firms responsible for this were forced to pay over £75 million in legal costs and compensation to over 800 workers. Now they want to know how many of them and others had their lives ruined by police involvement.
Everyone involved in this conspiracy knew what the consequences of deliberately enforced unemployment with the intentions of making it on a permanent basis.
I'm definitely aware that people had their entire lives destroyed because they weren't able to gain employment, and the only reason they weren't able to gain employment was basically for their political beliefs.
They've taken food off my kids' table, and I take this personally, and we are going to hound those till we get them in front of a public inquiry, have to account for themselves.
Well, we asked to speak to the Metropolitan Police, obviously, about this. They sent us a statement saying these issues had first been investigated back in 2014 and that further inquiries had established that info on building workers was passed by Special Branch to the blacklist. which of course doesn't answer our question, which was, but why haven't you told the people on the list? Let's talk to Dave Smith, who was himself blacklisted and founded a support group for other affected workers. Also with us, Rebecca Long-Bailey. She's a Labour MP. She's also Labour's business spokeswoman. And Julian Mulligan is with us, who speaks for the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners on the issue of transparency. Thank you very much for talking to us about all this. Dave Smith, then, the Met know, they just won't tell you, and however many others were blacklisted. Why is it so important for you to know if Special Branch spied upon you and passed that information to the list?
Really to get justice, because we've been complaining about this, and we had suspicions from the very start when we saw our blacklist files that it looked like some information came from the police. And when we first mentioned it, people looked at us like we were conspiracy theorists. They're like this was complete and utter nonsense. But the more we've dug into it, the more we've researched, not with information provided by the police, but ourselves as activists digging into it, we've found that actually it's true. And now the police have completely admitted it. But for there to be justice, people have to be held accountable for their actions.
But they've acknowledged it. You could hold them to account now.
But the other thing, as was said by one of the people who sent a text in to you earlier on today, was that we don't think we're the only people. You know, there are police units in this country that spy on people purely because of their politics, not because of crime. No one's ever accused me when I was working on a building site of committing crime. I was a union safety rep. I was trying to improve health and safety. I was trying to stop asbestos being used on building sites. So, you know, why they were spying on us, why they had an undercover police officer actually infiltrating the trade union UCAT with his union subscription fees paid for by a bank account set up specifically by a Special Branch, that someone needs to be held to account of that.
But there's an inquiry going on right now into undercover policing in this country. How much faith do you have in that?
Surprisingly little, if I'm honest. What's happened with the undercover police inquiries, the judge in charge, Sir John Mitton, as effectively appears to be agreeing with every single thing the police say, asking for anonymity, and allowing them. It won't be a public inquiry if the police get their way. It'll be an inquiry held in private.
Right, but so you don't think it will lead to, as you put it, justice?
For it to be justice, we need to know what's going on.
OK, well, let me bring in, if I may, Rebecca Long-Bailey, who is Labour's business spokesperson, as you know. What's your reaction to the fact that the police won't tell individuals if information was passed by Special Branch to the list?
Well, it's absolutely shocking, and it highlights the real need for an open public inquiry into blacklisting, not just the actions of the police. Blacklisting has destroyed the lives of families and workers up and down Britain for decades. And we know that a number of these companies settled their legal case in the last few years and have publicly apologised, but that doesn't alter the fact that there needs to be an open and transparent investigation into what happened, why it happened, if the police were involved, where their orders came from, and what we can do to restore faith in the construction industry. We've got a number of firms who act impeccably, and we want to make sure that we bolster that feeling of faith in our construction sector going forward.
If the police do release a redacted version of their confidential report to into the police involvement in the blacklist to the inquiry, would that be enough?
No, I still think we need to have a full public inquiry into blacklisting, not just in terms of the police's actions, but also what's endemic in the industry. We know from speaking to Labour colleagues and trade unions that there are still incidents of blacklisting being found, and we want to make sure that an inquiry shines a light, if you like, onto current practices and previous practices, gives justice to those families who have suffered, and makes sure that government is provided with the full facts to be able to implement a course of action to make sure that this never happens again.
Julian Mulligan, you're a Police and Crime Commissioner. You also speak on behalf of the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners when it comes to transparency. How transparent are the Met being on this, in your view?
So I think this is really concerning. I would like to understand the reasons, because my default position is transparency first. And that doesn't seem to be happening in this case.
Well, can you think of a plausible reason why a force wouldn't hand over this information to the individuals concerned?
Well, they will have some reasons, but my concern
Can you think of one?
Well, my concerns really are around whether or not there is a sort of cover-up for people who are still there, for the people who made decisions within the service. And it's not just the Met, it's other forces as well.
So they're protecting their own potentially, you believe?
They may well be, I don't know. They haven't obviously come out with any specific reasons. We need to understand those. If there's lives put at risk or harm that could be done, then they need to explain that. But at the moment, the lack of transparency around it is really concerning and troubling.
So are you calling on them to release the full details?
I don't. There might be something in there that is legitimate. The police have undercover policing is an important part of policing operations in this country, but there may be stuff in there that they do need to keep behind their sort of closed doors, if you like. But we need to understand that, and at the moment, the complete sort of lack of transparency around this is really concerning, and I would be suspicious around people trying to protect themselves.
Right. You've heard from Dave Smith here, Julia Mulligan, that he doesn't have any faith in this inquiry into undercover policing. How do you react to that?
Well, I think you've seen from other inquiries when there is no faith in the chair or no faith in the inquiry, things get very difficult indeed. And people, the victims, need to have full confidence in any inquiry, and clearly this isn't the case. So I think there needs to be some work done urgently to look at how that is working. It's been mired in difficulties right from the get-go, and when you talk to senior officers about it, they do look uncomfortable. And I think there's cultural issues here. You know, undercover policing is still one of the very sort of secret areas of policing. There's been a lot of strides made in transparency over recent years, but this is still one of the areas of policing where they are really reluctant.
Yeah. Is there still a justification for undercover policing in your view?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can see, you know, there's been undercover work that has led to the apprehension of terrorist suspects and all sorts of different things. So it is valuable, and the National Police Chiefs Council have put more stringent rules around it as well. So they are tightening up, and there is also a specialist commissioner who looks at the practice and the way that the police work in this area. So there is stuff going on around it, and a lot of it. But there is still, I don't think, a default for transparency, and that's what's needed.
Dave Smith, your message briefly to the Met today, now?
If you basically give us the names. Give us the names. They've admitted that they were spied on more than 1,000 perfectly democratic, peaceful campaign groups. They still won't give us a name. And the question about crime, they weren't spying on criminals. They were spying on CND, anti-apartheid, the Young Liberals, the Labour Party, the Green Party and trade unions. This isn't about crime. This is about spying on politics, people who for their political opinions. And realistically, in Britain in 2018, if we're going to be a democratic country, then that kind of stuff shouldn't be going on. And those who've given the orders for that should be held accountable in a full public inquiry, whether it's under the other kind of undercover police or specifically on blacklisting.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave Smith. Jack has got in touch with us. I was one of more than 3,000 building workers who was put on the blacklist simply for being active in my trade union. That might seem a long time ago, but in 2013, I was told by the Information Commissioner's Office that my file had been passed on to and kept by the Consulting Association, who Simon mentioned in his film, who'd taken over the blacklist. They had kept the file until 2009, nearly 30 years after I had last worked in the construction industry. And this on blacklisting, final one, there may be justification for undercover operations in some circumstances, but never against trade unionists or political activists who have a democratic right to organise and protest.